I don't look at my rivals very much on Instagram. It's funny actually. The other day I did a little bit. I was, I think it was maybe a week and a half ago, once the semi-final rosters were finalized. So got an upcoming competition, and I just wanted to see like what these guys have been up to. Right, I'm going to be competing against them. I want to beat them. So I was poking around, and it got to me. Like it definitely, there was a day and a half to 2 days where like my confidence dipped in myself. It was super noticeable. It was crazy actually. Yeah. And my confidence right before that was like really high. I'd had like 5-6 days of great training, like strength stuff was great. Endurance stuff was great. Like, all this stuff was clicking. And then I watched some of those videos. I was looking at some of their scores on the game site, and like some of them went to Wodapalooza. So I was looking at their Wodapalooza scores, and my confidence dipped in like a noticeable way for like a day and a half, 2 days. And I found myself thinking about those athletes. I'm like, oh man, I don't know. Like, those guys are pretty good. Like, maybe I can't win this one, but like even top 5, and I'm kind of like, I'm like lowering my expectations and my belief in myself after looking at these other athletes' Instagrams.
This is the Limitless Athlete podcast. I'm Tom Foxley, founder of Mindset Rx'd and your host. And I believe that comparison really is the thief of joy.
I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm willing to work as hard as I can.
There is no past, there's no future, there's just this moment right here.
If I did that, if I can get through that, like, come at me.
Changing how I saw myself, like as a man, not just as an athlete.
It's okay that I struggle. It's okay. That's part of the deal. It's how I respond to it.
Do you catch yourself Instagram stalking to check up on how other athletes are doing? Scrolling through the leaderboard to check your placings when really you should be in bed? Watching other athletes in workouts when you could be in your own lane? Comparison has never been easier. Instead of strawmanning this argument, let's take the side of comparison. Let's listen to the voice in your head that says, just check the leaderboard one more time. Let's see what so-and-so did in that workout and how their training is going. Let's give it its due credit. I mean, surely it provides some benefit, right? When watching others, you can identify things you can do better and even character skills to aim at. You may see the exact key that you need to unlock your next level, if only you compare hard enough. But listen carefully. Is that voice saying things like, oh man, I admire so-and-so's grit and determination, and here's how I can work towards that? Or is it saying things like, shit, I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm too slow? What's more, what does this do to your self-belief? Improve it or lessen it? It probably will give you this boost of motivation, but fear-driven motivation is quick to disappear and can cause long-term mindset challenges. When you are deciding whether your comparison is useful or not, consider these 3 questions. 1. Does it make me feel more or less like the person I want to be? 2. Does this help me create a relationship with myself, which helps me achieve my goals? And 3, most importantly, what's the story I'm telling myself? In this episode with Brent Fikowski, we get into great length to discuss comparison and how to stop it. One thing we can all take from this interview is Brent's ability not to double down on his emotionally disruptive states by getting upset at himself. He's aware enough not to let his anxiety make him more anxious or his stress make him more stressed. This is one thing we can all be careful about, not becoming frustrated by our frustration or sad about our sadness. Experiencing the emotion once is plenty. Alongside comparison, we also discuss dealing with doubt, self-generated confidence, overcoming self-criticism, how to handle online qualifiers, and incorporating fun into training. If you enjoy this episode with Brent Fikowski, aka The Professor, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss upcoming episodes. So, Brent, welcome to the show, dude.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm here in my gym. I'm going to be maybe moving around a bit and stretching, but all eyes on you.
Good.
The guest and the
as we like it. Yeah. This show is all about me. So if we can make it all about me, that's perfect. So let's start. Obviously, exciting times for you right now. I'll let you kind of deliver the news. But yeah, let's start with what the news is, and then we can go into exploring that.
Yeah. So my wife and I had our first child a couple of weeks ago here, at the filming of this episode, and it's been a lot of fun. Yeah, ain't nothing like the real thing. We were pretty well prepared, as far as like, doing our research and talking to people that have had kids, and came into it with kind of eyes wide open that it can go a lot of different ways. But so far it's been great. It's been a lot of fun, and we're getting pretty good sleep, all things considered, actually. So that was the one big worry I think both of us had. And other than that, Claire's healthy, baby's healthy. I'm happy. We're good.
Yeah, fantastic news. And like I think the thing that really interests me that lots of people will be able to relate to is the idea of like, you're kind of adding responsibility into your life, and you're kind of, you're adding another thing to think about from day to day. How does that affect the way that you kind of view competing? Does it affect that? Does it kind of change the way you prioritize things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have a coach in Kelowna here that I work with for some running and sprinting. And I told him that Claire and I were having a baby in a couple months. So I told him a few months ago, and he was so excited. And not only just for us as a couple, but also he's like, "Oh, I'm so excited for you as an athlete." He's like, "Every athlete I've known, it's like after they have kids, they're better. They compete better." He was telling me about Andre DeGrasse, who's a sprinter in Canada, he's won 200 meter at the Olympics and stuff. And he's like, after he had a kid and two kids, he's like, his career has gotten so much better. He's like, it's like it adds a level of perspective. And he's like, the guy, he's just listened to interviews with him, and it's like, he'll have a training session and he might just have to end it early if he's like, what, I gotta go, I gotta go drop the kids off. And there's just a little more like carefree, I think. As far as, it's pretty early for me to tell exactly how it's going to affect things. Definitely, the last few years, Claire and I, especially over the last couple of years, have become more and more of our daily life is sort of centered around me maximizing my ability to compete at a high level. So it's a very selfish little life we have here that's pretty much centered around me. And Claire's amazing to be on board with that. And obviously we still do things for her, but like just the day-to-day routine is pretty much set up for me to maximize my training and competing. And so, that's definitely changed, where it's like, well, we wouldn't be getting up this early or, at the middle of the night if it wasn't for the baby being here. And so, yeah, it's different, and it's too early to really like, as far as like mentally, it hasn't really changed too much. I'm still in the gym more or less the same amount of time. And once I'm in here, I'm not really thinking about anything else other than training. But there's definitely this urge to get back inside and help Claire out and see the baby. So
it must be a crazy shift in perspective to think, oh, there's someone else that is relying on me now, and like my career is something else. It's not something else. It's basically like there's fewer sections in your life that you can dedicate to training or like mental energy, just because you have to. Have you seen that like affect anything, or has it made any shifts in terms of perspective?
I'll admit, like, not too much yet. I'm sure that it will. There have been a couple days where I've been really tired, and I'm like, well, I still have to go and do this. Right? Like I still have to go out there and train. And once I get started and once I warm up, you'll get that little hit of energy. You'll get the adrenaline going or whatever the hormone is. And, you'll start to enjoy training. And part of the little voice in my head, I always find something to get out there and do that, because it's not the first time I've been tired and forced myself to train. But I'm like, well, like this is still your job, right? Like this is still, your job is to go out there and train. And if you train, the likelihood of you crafting a better income increases, and you need that income for this baby. So there's a little bit of that where it's, I always found a reason to train when I was tired, but that's kind of the voice that's definitely like pushed itself to the forefront. Is like, well, like, yeah, you want to just relax or have a nap or hang out with the baby, but this is just as important in a different way. This is your job. So, there's been like a new form of motivation, but I'm not going to I can't really honestly give you a, like, I've never been so motivated kind of speech. You know, you hear some people say like, you know, once I had a kid, like this really like grand, I can't say it's been like that yet, but I mean, maybe I'll have some moments like that in the future.
You haven't PR'd every lift in the last couple of weeks?
No, no, nothing like that, or not like some massive change in emotion. Like now that I'm fighting for her, you know, And, no, it's nothing that extreme, or no Hollywood type moments yet. But.
I suppose that speaks to the character trait that people, I suppose, most associate with you, which is quite a composed, analytical, focused approach to training. Like that obviously is super helpful in so many times. I was speaking to Justin Kotler on the podcast the other day, and he was like, "Oh, if you want a good example of this, just look at Brent Fikowski. Like he has that focus, he has that balance." I know that you always have your ups and downs in scenarios, and like emotionality has highs and lows as with any human. But do you find that analytical approach and that ability to step back sometimes has drawbacks?
Yeah. You know, so I think, man, where to even start with that? You know, usually by the time I'm on camera or I'm doing an interview, like I'm usually putting my best self forward, right? Like, you know, on this call, you're going to hear the best version of me, more or less. You know, try to be like honest and vulnerable, but, you know, there's still definitely, you know, I was going through a bit of a rough patch and just like mentally training, I'd say like around January, February. And so I did an open workout in Calgary, and there was a female athlete there who was, you know, on the cusp of making semis again. And we were talking, and, you know, I think she was just dealing with some self-doubt. And I told her, I was like, "Oh, I deal with a lot of self-doubt." She's like, "Oh, I didn't think, you know, you seem like you're just always like perfect. Like you're dialed in, like you've got it, you know, you're like surrender the outcome, release the outcome, like all that kind of stuff." Cause that's what I always say on the games interviews or, you know, some documentary or interview like this. And so, you know, you see that enough and you're like, man, this guy Brent, he's just like a Zen robot or something, right? Or he's just so like, he's got it all figured out. And I said to her, I'm like, you know, there's probably only about, you know, I said to her, it was a little bit of exaggeration, but I'm like 360 days of the year, I don't have a lot of confidence, or I don't have a lot of, like, I don't see myself as a games athlete. You know, it's just like, it's like the day or two before competition, I start to be like, I'm going to win. And then at the competition, I believe I'm like, when I'm there, I'm like, I'm going to win. I feel great. Even if, and cause usually like my training builds up to that, and there's a taper and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, like I'm here, I've got what it takes. But, you know, leading up to the open, during the open, leading up to quarters, you know, even last week at times, it's like, man, like I just don't feel, you know, I don't feel like I'm good enough, or I'm making enough progress, or people are catching me, or, you know, part of that's the online nature of the sport. But, you know, there's a lot of like doubt, and that sometimes it gets to an unhealthy level, but even when it's at a manageable level, it's kind of there as this constant like reminder to keep pushing. And like, I'm here in a gym and I train by myself, and people ask how I do that. And I think part of that is what I just described. It's like, I know every time I do a workout with burpees, it's like I'm pushing myself, like there's someone faster and fitter and shorter than me who's doing burpees right next to me. And that's like kind of always there. Yeah. And so, you know, like, I think to answer your question, that analytical side, I'm like constantly thinking. So I'm constantly like thinking about, oh, I need to get better at this. I need to get better at this. And what can I do tonight to make tomorrow's sessions better? And, you know, it can just, you know, and I keep adding things sometimes to my list of like, oh, I should really like research, you know, this type of, you know, like drills for this, or, you know, am I doing this technically right? Whereas I'm sure there's a lot of people that, you know, haven't really technically improved their, I don't know, burpees in years. So I just do burpees, and I'm constantly looking for videos and watching my own video and thinking like, well, how can my burpees be like better? So it can be pretty overwhelming, I think, is probably the best way to put it. I think that's the downside of, you know, being dialed in and being thorough and being analytical, is like, it can just get to a point where it's like taking away from just like, well, Brent, at the end of the day, you need to just like get sweaty repeatedly, and you're probably going to do fine. Like, you, especially now that I've gotten to a point where like there's that ability within me, that fitness within me. It's like, you just need to kind of get back to that fitness you had a couple months ago or a year ago, and improve on a few things, and you're going to do just fine. It's not like an unknown. It's like you just need to tap into it again. You don't have to do something with your body you've never done before, like not multiple things. It's like, hey, just be as fit as you were in 2021 and get better at like 2 or 3 things, and like you're going to have a great year. But I can be just like relentlessly trying to maximize every little detail, and it can probably have a detrimental effect at times.
Yeah. And obviously that's got a huge advantage, because it's like you'll see things because you think about things that other people won't see, and you'll have ideas, and you'll like that encourages you to put in like more work, but also more insight into what you could be doing. Obviously it can become overwhelming when you're like, okay, this needs to go right now. I need to stop this. What's your process of turning that off, or trying to turn it off, or what's your relationship with it?
Yeah, I think, especially over the last 2 months or so, it's been pretty good. I think just kind of leading up to and during and after quarterfinals here in 2022. And I think the process is just sort of like trying to bring a bit of fun into training will help, just like sometimes I'll have a workout, and instead of like, it'll just be, like 10-minute AMRAP of burpees, toes to bar, and power cleans, right? It's just like CrossFit. And, usually I'll look at that and I'll have goals. So I'll say, well, I want to keep my burpees at this pace, and I want to do this type of clean, touch and go, like a certain technical style muscle clean, let's say. And I want my transitions to be fast or whatever. I'll have these goals. And sometimes, with a workout like that, instead of making like 4 goals and like time related goal and a movement related goal and a technical related goal and a pacing, I'll make like 1 goal, and I'll just say like, just have fun, like just start not too fast. And at the end, just go as hard as you feel like is necessary today. Like if you're feeling it, then it's like, let's burn the house down. Let's try and like really get into the pain cave right at the end. Or if you're just like not feeling it, and you're just kind of just have fun, just get through it, like do the reps, do them well. There's like make a goal, like whether it's a technical goal or a time related goal, or, usually if it's 3 movements, I'll do like, there'll be a technical kind of goal for each movement maybe. And then maybe 1 movement will have like a pacing goal. So it's like, I need to make sure my burpees are fast. And it's like the cleans can be slow, the burpees or the toes to bar can be slow, the transitions can be slow, but the burpees have to be at this specific pace. And then just do it, just don't. And I think, that's what a lot of people just do, is they just look at a workout like, all right, here we go. And they just, crack the knuckles and they just go. And I sometimes just set all these goals, which I think has a big benefit. And I think a lot of people could learn from that and get a lot better if they treated things like that, but there's definitely a limit to it. And then another thing to like, just start like letting go and not allowing myself to get like so wrapped up in all those things. Sometimes it's just like my relationship to food, just being a little more relaxed with that. And then also, if there's these breaks in the day where I'm not training, depending on the day, they happen at different times, whether it's lunchtime or dinner or whatever, or in the morning. And sometimes during those times, I feel like, oh, like I have free time now, I have to get more done. And so I'll like try and get stuff done on my to-do list. I'll try and do some stuff for the PFA. I'll like try and answer some emails. I'll get done some stuff for my taxes. And just trying to be a little more kind to myself and be like, hey, Brent, like just like try and do like get one thing done and then just do nothing, like stare at the ceiling or like listen to some music or go have a nap if you're tired, or even if it's just like close your eyes for 10 seconds and on the couch. I think we babysat a dog a while ago and was just kind of like enjoying time with that dog, and just kind of made me realize like you watch the dog and it just does whatever it wants all the time. And people, that like anyone listening to this, like, thanks, Brent, like, wow. But not having a dog for a while, and then you have it and you just, it'll be like super energetic, playful. And then the next thing it's like having a nap in like the strangest position, like right in the sun at 1 p.m. And then it's back up and it's doing stuff and it's curious. And then it's just like, oh, I'm tired again, and it sleeps. And I'm, it's like, if you can embrace that sort of like freeness about your day. Obviously, you still need to have a job and get stuff done, but I think there's like an element to that where, maybe it's a rest day or a weekend, or, in the evening, it's like, hey, maybe just be a little less regimented.
Hey, if you're enjoying this episode, chances are you'll enjoy our free ebook, How to Stop Substandard Self-Critical Plateaus and Unleash Your Potential. It's a step-by-step guide to finding your mojo again and getting back to the athlete you know you can be. It's free. You just have to stick your email address in and download it. To find it, head to mindsetrxd.com/ebook. That's mindsetrxd.com/ebook. Now, let's get on with the show. There's like this structure between like discipline, force, order, and chaos, relaxed, openness, freedom. That's such a difficult balance to strike, whether you're an athlete or whether you are an accountant or whether you're both. You have these kind of this relationship between the two that is, I think, once you manage and once you're aware of like, okay, what do I need right now? That's when you find that balance, and that's when you find that ability to just, okay, need a bit more freedom here to let the workout flow a bit more and not force these goals. And then there's time where it's like, all right, no, time to pull yourself up by the socks and go, right, we're doing this right now. We're moving forwards, we're adding more structure. That awareness is kind of what I found to be the key of it, and what our athletes seem to work with as well. It's like, okay, I'm sensing this, I'm seeing this, now I've got more awareness. What are the kind of the signs that you're cluing in, or what are the signs that you need to pay attention to?
Yeah. There's definitely, I get, I'm easily irritated, is a big one. Definitely if I'm struggling to fall asleep, or if I keep waking up in the middle of the night or early in the morning, and my mind's like, I feel like my mind's racing. If I come into the gym and I find that I have a really long warm up, and it's not because I'm sore, but it's like, I keep I tidy something up and I'm like, oh, I have to write this down on my phone. I got to remember to do this later. And I have to do this. And and it just feels like I just can't just come in, write down a warm up, get started and get into training. It feels like not only do I need to warm up my body, it's like I'm like doing stuff to calm down my mind first. So there's this like I've been in here for 45 minutes and I haven't even started my first, EMOM of wall balls and push press or something. You're like, what am I doing? And there's obviously a luxury there with having a home gym and that being my job. But, that I'm sure people experience that if they're, wanting to get a chore done in the house, right? Or something, or just anything. And they're like, man, I've just been kind of spinning and I haven't been getting anything done because it's like, not only do I need to actually do some prep to get stuck into this task, but my mind is just so active. I can't just get into the task. So I'm trying to offload all this other noise first before I can start with the thing that's actually important, that moves me forward, moves me closer to my goals. That's a big one. And then, like you mentioned, you're talking about awareness, and that's another thing. I think just being kinder to myself before, but when I am, I think there was a time where I felt like if I was stressed, or if I was, a bit worked up, I felt like I was failing, felt like I was losing, and I needed to get rid of it quickly and, fix that and get back into a good state. And obviously if you try and force that, it doesn't kind of happen. And so, it's kind of almost like this mantra of quit trying to improve yourself, you're fine. Kind of, it was something like that in the last few months, that it's like, Brent, you don't need to fix anything. You don't need to find some secret meditation practice or some, it's like, you're fine. You're capable of just being, you're just capable of being, you don't have to, there's nothing wrong with you. You don't have to make some drastic shift and start doing some, meditation practice twice a day. And it's just do your thing, go enjoy training, come in, watch some TV, do your work on, your computer, like just like do the things and don't overthink everything. And that made a big difference in my, my happiness and my ability to sleep, and, training got better. And I was definitely like less sore as soon as I started doing that too, right? There's like the physiological component of just being wound up all the time that, allows you to, maybe you're not recovering as well. And so that was kind of another, thing that I realized is I'm like, hey, you just need to like stop trying to fix it. Just do the things that need to get done today. And don't like overthink about, your like how it's getting done, I guess. And like your mindset, and like, don't like hyper analyze every little thing. Just go train and, do your taxes and just like have fun. And then sure enough, it's like, oh, now I actually feel pretty good.
Yeah. When we've got this feeling that, oh, I'm experiencing this and this is a bad thing and it shouldn't be here, you start to suffer with it twice. I know, like when I've in the past struggled with things like anxiety, it's been like, oh, I'm so my mind is racing. I shouldn't be racing because I should have been outside more today. I should have done these 5 things that have this is the thing that's killing me. And then I'm not only suffering once that I'm kind of feeling anxious, I'm suffering twice because I'm feeling anxious about feeling anxious, or feeling stressed out about feeling anxious. And like that relationship with it and just is interesting, where you can kind of go, actually, I am feeling anxious, or I am feeling low, or whatever, but that's okay. I'm allowed to feel this way. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a tough one to develop though.
Yeah. I think what you said is perfect. It's like, as soon as if I get into a place where I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling worked up, I start to think about the things I didn't do in the last week that or the things I did or didn't do in the last week that got me in this place. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I should have got some fresh air. I shouldn't have stayed up late trying to finish that thing last night. I should have trained earlier this morning so I have more time this afternoon, so that I didn't have, and you just start like thinking about all, and instead of just, being like, well, I'm anxious, well, let's go train, and I think there's this like element of like, well, whatever, that I kind of tried to adopt. And not that I'm like ignoring it or pushing it away or just like, stuffing it down with, TV or something like that. But just like a little like still being aware of it, and then just being like, oh, well, this will probably pass because it's been here before and it'll pass. And, still like, instead of fussing about not going outside or not doing these meditation things, it's like, well, maybe just do one of them. Like maybe just, go outside, maybe just, go for a walk without your headphones in and without your cell phone, just around the block. It'll only take 5 minutes. So, kind of stuff like that.
It's almost like when you accept the negative emotion, its half-life diminishes greatly. It's like, okay, like if you force it away, it's like it restarts its peak over and over and over again. But the quicker you accept it, the quicker its half-life diminishes, and then it becomes much smaller, much quicker. It's like once you really notice fear or anxiety or happiness or stress or whatever it is, it almost just goes instantly. It's a really strange meditation process. One of those things that like, actually, one of the most difficult things to do when you're in that state must be going into a float tank, which I know you've done on a frequent basis. Have you been in the float tank when you're in that state of like, shit, I'm not doing enough?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. And like anything, we often catch a problem when it's too late or when it's at its peak. And so it's like, oh, I need to book a float, or Claire will tell me like, Brent, you should book a float this week because I'm like, wigging out, stressed out. So you go in the float tank and, you feel like you're spinning, and it takes, but what's nice about the float tank is it's, you're, hold on here. What's this? What is this? Oh, never mind. You're forced to just sit with it, right? Because you're in the dark and you can't feel anything, you can't see anything, you can't smell anything. There's just like basically no sensation at all. So you're just there with your head. And so if I'm pretty chill, like if I went into a float tank today, I'd probably get in there and my mind would just kind of like loosely wander for a bit. I'd probably fall asleep, and then I'd wake up, and then I would, just get to choose what I think about. Whereas if I was in a float tank when I'm really anxious, for the first 15 minutes, my mind is just nonstop, just like yelling at me. Like there's, 10 TV screens and they're all like telling me something different. And then slowly some of those TV screens are turned off, because it's like, well, I can't just do this for an hour straight, so eventually they start to just they just essentially wear out. It's not even like a conscious thing. It's like, those things kind of wear out. And then when it goes well, eventually they kind of wear out. And then you sort of get to the core of the maybe one or two things that are like actually kind of causing the anxiety. And so for me, that's often it's usually, if I'm dealing with like a little bit of an injury or like a niggle or something with training, that causes a lot of stress for me, because it feels, that's obviously not having those is important for my career and my happiness. So maybe not happiness, but definitely my career. And so like that can cause a lot of like stress that I have a tough time getting rid of. And then the other one is if there's like a looming thing hanging over me, whether it's something with one of my businesses that I haven't finished yet, or something with the PFA that I really want to finish, or a sponsorship obligation that I like need to wrap my head around and like give an answer to them as to like, yeah, let's do it this way. And so it's usually those two things are the things that like I find when I strip it all away. I'm like, okay, well, let's just, with the injury, or like niggle or whatever it is, it's like, well, let's just deal with it. Like, let's, it's like, it's going to take what it's going to take. Like, just put in the work every day with the stretching, move your training around so it doesn't get any worse, and like, just deal with it, man. Like, and usually with that, I think back to the past. I'm like, well, like, remember when you had that? I remember when you had that. And eventually you got over it. And it was fine. And then you went to that competition and you did great. Like, yeah, you're right. I'm like, yeah, well, so it'll be fine again. And then the other thing, it's like, all right, like when you get out of here, like, let's do that one thing. And it's like that project at school where you'd put off starting it forever, right? You do all this other stuff, except you wouldn't start the damn project. Mm-hmm. And then you finally start it and you're like, oh, this wasn't so bad. Like, why didn't I start this 2 weeks ago?
Yeah. Parkinson's law. A task expands to the amount of time allotted. It's like, it's the thing. And that's the classic thing with homework. There's like this forced space that you're creating. It's like, okay, going into this float tank, it's going to give me that space, even though it feels like I'm doing a task, which is, it's kind of like tricking yourself into that, like almost talking about that yin and yang force and recovery aspect again. It's like that gives you that space, that freedom for your thoughts to unravel and spin and open out. It's like, oh, okay, that's what that is. And it was so messed up and linked in with this thing and so kind of confused, and like that other thing was coming in at it as well. There's now like, okay, they start to separate and I can see that as they are. And like, I suppose that's what meditation is. It's what all these things hopefully are, that perspective on your own thoughts. Have you played around with breath work?
Yes and no. I mean, basically no. I've done a bit of it. I don't know. I've done a little bit. Like, I've done some of the, lying on the floor, like the box breathing stuff, and I'll go in the cold plunge or the sauna, and I'll just like try and do some nasal breathing, just breathing slow. Or there was some other one with a funny name where you breathe in through one nostril, hold it, breathe out the other, and you're like holding with your middle finger in your nose or your thumb, and you're sitting like upright in a cross-legged. I don't know. It's not really, I mean, I don't like saying the word, that's not really for me, bro. But it's not really for me, bro. I don't know. It just never really, I don't know, man. Maybe one day I'll have a great experience with it. I'll be like, oh, that's it. I guess I'm like, maybe people talk about it and I'm expecting it to be this like aha moment, and it's just like, oh, I'm just sitting here breathing, and I was going to be breathing anyway.
Okay, right.
But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that if you're listening to this and you've never tried breath work, give it a shot. And if you're listening to this and you love breath work and you're mad at me, then don't stop if it works for you. But I don't know. It's just, it's something I keep, every like 6 months or something, I'll, I should do that. And I'll like try it, and it just never really sticks. It's just never really stuck. I've given it a shot a few times, and found like a playlist or something, or downloaded a free app or something like that, and it just never has really stuck with me. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like there's not very many. There are a lot of good protocols, but they're so hidden in not good protocols. And it's like there's a lot of crap along with the good stuff, and it's like really hard work to seek out the good stuff in it from my experience anyway. You spoke about before, like the element of when you're feeling like there's like maybe there's a bit of self-doubt knocking around, that you go back and say, hey, I've overcome this before by trying this, and I've like done this. And like, how do you, I suppose that what that equates to is confidence. How do you enforce confidence or bolster confidence or train confidence? Like, how do you ensure it's there when you need it?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing is if I am dealing with that, I often think like, if my best friend was dealing with this, what would I tell them? You know, what advice would I give them? And so, you know, I try and be my own best friend, and, you know, I know myself better than anyone. So, you know, if I'm dealing with a confidence thing, you know, lower confidence, be like, well, you know, like kind of have that conversation in my head, like, well, why? Well, you know, I've been seeing, you know, these guys did so well at this competition, and my training hasn't been going very well because of this, this, and this. And, you know, like maybe I've got this little like tweak, you know, in this part of my body. And then like, I've been working on these things, but I don't feel like they're getting better, and haven't been working on these things. And so I know they're not getting better, and okay. Like, yeah, you're thinking of all those things. Like, well, you know, I'm fortunate that I can draw on experiences where I go, well, do you remember, you know, 2019 or 2017 or 2018 where you had these similar feelings? Yeah. And then, well, how did those seasons go? You're like, yeah, pretty good. You know, like, you know, and if nothing else, like, you know, was dealing with worse feelings, and maybe feelings that were more founded in reality in some of those seasons, where it's like, yeah, like you're dealing with this little like shoulder tweak, but do you remember when you had that really bad shoulder problem? Oh yeah. And like, you know, then what happened 3 months later? Oh yeah, I like won regionals. Like, yeah, sweet. So, you know, if you're dealing with like a little shoulder problem now, it's like probably not going to take 3 months. It's probably going to take, you know, 3 days or 3 weeks, and then you'll be fine again. And, you know, all those years of work haven't just disappeared. So like, yeah, like giving myself good advice, you know, using experience. I'm very lucky. Not lucky is not the right word, but there are a lot of people that don't have that same experience that I do with like competing as much as I have, both in CrossFit, but even before that, I've competed a lot in volleyball and swimming. And so for people that don't have that experience, you know, still try to give yourself that good advice. And it's sort of this idea of like, you know, like, well, what are you going to do about it? You know, like you can sit here and you can fret about the future and how it could go wrong, or you could do something that's likely to positively impact the future. And I had a conversation once with an athlete that him and his team missed out on the CrossFit Games by like a couple points, and it was devastating. And so he messaged me. He's like, man, what do I do? You know, like, I know that you missed out of the games, you know, twice. You were very close. And then you came back and you made the games the next year. Like, how did you deal with that? And I said, well, I came to the realization that, you know, if I wanted to do this again, it all had to be worth it, knowing that I might not make it again. So I had to have that like kind of extreme ownership, and I couldn't try and convince myself or trick myself into believing, oh, if I do it again this year and I just work harder, then I'm going to make the games. Because there's no guarantee in any sport, in anything in life, but definitely not CrossFit, because the workouts change, right? The workouts change, and the athletes from year to year change a lot in their skills and just who they are and which event you go to qualify for the next stage. It just changes so much. It changes so much more than most sports too. So I'm like, if you can surrender that and just say, like, it's still worth it to me. Like, it's still worth my time. I'm still willing to come to the gym every day. I'm still willing to go to bed early, still willing to eat well, still willing to say no when someone wants to, you know, go out late, or, you know, take a 4-day camping trip because I need to train that weekend. And, you know, that weekend matters in my training cycle. And if you're willing to do that, and it doesn't feel like a sacrifice, it feels like something you truly want to do, and it's worth it, but it has to be worth it even if you don't make it again. Because you might not make it again. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, dude, you know, like, if you just freaking get in there and you train as hard as you can, you'll make it for sure because I did. It's like, no, I'm not going to tell you that because there's no guarantee, right? Like there's no guarantee that I'm, I wasn't confident I was going to make semis this year. I really like, there was a long period of time there where I was not super confident that I was going to make semis. I kept kind of daydreaming, day nightmaring about worst case scenarios where quarterfinals wouldn't go well and I didn't make semis. But I just did as many little things as I could to, safeguard against that. And I was going to be okay with my season if that happened. And it's the same with semis, right? I mean, I've training's actually been going really, really well lately. So I'm pretty confident that semis is going to be fine. But I do know that there's a definite possibility, more than 1%, that I won't make the games this year. Right. Like it's there. Because, I know there's a handful of guys at my semis that they're not planning to miss it. Right. That's sport. And so, I'm willing to do those little things and for it, for them not to be enough. And I think that kind of puts you in a place where you can be free to, accept failure and on the scoreboard, and it doesn't feel like a failure because it's like, hey, I did everything I could and I'm not ashamed of that. So when I have those doubts, it's just accepting them. It's like, hey, like, good, like you have doubts, like, good, it's because you care, it's because you're thinking about the reality that there are winners and losers in sports, and this doubt is coming from the fact that you don't want to be one of the people that views that competition as one of the losers, but you might be. And so like, let's get back to work. Like, let's put in the work and enjoy the work and be proud of that. And then not feel like you have to explain yourself to anyone. You don't have to explain yourself on social media or explain yourself to someone, because the people that care, like my coaches and my family and my wife, like they know what I'm doing. They know the work I'm putting in. And like, if I don't make it, they're not going to think any less of me. And so it's like, I think a lot of that self-doubt comes from like a place of like feeling like it's part of like an image, or, it's like it was a waste of time. And there's this fear that all this was for a waste of time if I don't make the games, or I don't make semis, or, the open doesn't go well, or whatever that is for each individual person. And, that's not who you are, right? You just have to surrender a lot of that. And when you have that self-doubt, it's like, well, like it's because I care, and all I can do is just keep caring and keep trying and, see what happens.
So how do you, I had about 5 points I wanted to dive into there. So what we're essentially saying is like, the process has to be so meaningful in itself that the outcome is almost meaningless or is a nice side effect. There has to be there has to be such value within the process. What makes a meaningful process for you?
I think people have asked me this before, and it's kind of like, I've enjoyed every job I've had in a certain way, and I've had some not so great jobs. Like I've worked retail, I worked at a rental car agency, not super enjoyable jobs, the kind of jobs that no one works there anymore, right? All the people I worked with at those jobs like no longer work there, if that says anything. But I always enjoy them. Like I enjoy working hard towards a goal, repeatedly, right? Whether it's improving processes or whatever that is. And so like I like crafting a plan and executing on a plan. And so that's what I feel like training is. It's this there's these 3-week training blocks, and it's like it's an accomplishment to get through that, and it's an accomplishment to to see my ring muscle up technique improve over the last year and a half that I've been working on it. It's an accomplishment to just like kind of like, my body's like a puzzle, right? And so there's these like, you learn like, oh, I'm always having this like issue with my shoulder or my hips or my knees or something. And then you learn, oh man, if I like release this muscle, like that's going to help that pain. And I write that down somewhere so the next time I can find it. And so for me, the process of doing that and, just kind of learning and, just like constantly trying to make things better and accumulating like kind of knowledge. And it's kind of hard because like I realized a lot of the knowledge and the experiences in this training, it's not going to be super transferable when I'm done. Even if I'm a coach, I'm not sure if a lot of the things I've learned, they're all pretty unique to me, right? They're all very specific little hacks and little solutions to little problems that only I'm going to have. But it's still like problem solving, right? Like every day I'm like, I'm working on a puzzle. I'm working on this big puzzle, and there's little puzzles within that puzzle, and there's even little smaller puzzles within that puzzle. And for me, I think that's what makes the journey like enjoyable. And like some days, like I'll have a morning session, eat some food, whatever, and I'm just tired. I'm really tired. I'm really sore, and I look at my afternoon training session. I'm like, I don't want to do that. Like that doesn't like and then I do it, and there's a sense of accomplishment, right? I'm like, hey, I went out there, and that actually went pretty well. That was a solid like 8 out of 10 training session, and I got a little better, and I did it. I did the difficult, like I did the thing that was hard that's going to help me, reach this potential goal. And like, that felt good. And, the cheap thrills are, anyone can have those. Anyone can go to a bar and buy a drink and, yell at a TV screen or something. Like everyone can do that. There's no like, the only cost of entry is, the cost to buy the drink. Right. Whereas, the kind of stuff you get to do, pursuing this goal is, you can't pay to go to the CrossFit Games, right? Like there's no, those sorts of things. And even, even like snatching something heavy or improving your ring muscle up, like people can't take that away from you, right? It's not something that can be recreated by anyone else. So they're kind of unique experiences, and their experiences, a lot of them are for me, right? Like there's countless experiences I've had with, FaceTiming a coach when I'm working on my back squat, or just, me filming something and having a big smile on my face when I figure something out in the gym here. Like, and those are for me, it's like, there's like a high amount of satisfaction and pride that goes into just so many little things I've done over the last few weeks and last few years that, I get to experience, and they're not cheap thrills. They're things I had to work for.
It's quite a courageous thing to say, and I really do mean that in saying that, like, this is something that I'm doing for me and for my value hierarchy, and I'm going to not dismiss, but not pay attention to, or not let alter my own behaviors, someone else's expectations of me. And when you become like you are, more and more in the kind of the public eye, there's, I think, an expectation to act in a certain way, or to act in accordance with other people's expectations of you. Have you found that in, like, when you've been training, when you've been competing, you found other people's expectations of you letting influence your actions?
Yeah, I'm definitely not immune from it. Like, again, on a call like this, you're going to see the best version of me. I'm going to say all the right things. And I do believe all these things are true, but there are definitely moments when, I let the opinions of others impact me, for sure. I've gotten a lot better over the last few years at it. Honestly, a big moment for me was even like during the first bit of COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement. Bit of like it's like, oh man, like, what are my values? You're able to just kind of go through. There was like, everyone felt like this like huge cultural pressure to like post on social media in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, which I don't regret anything I said then, and I still stand by things that I said then. And would I do things a little bit differently now? Like, maybe, and not because my values have changed, and not because my values were wrong then, but I think some of the things I might have done publicly, I did out of, for other people's opinions, and maybe not for me, and when you talk about doing it for me, there's this video that I love, and it's Snoop Dogg. He gets like a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, or maybe he gets like an honorary degree. And he said, they're like, he's like, hey, it's Snoop Dogg. And he's like, I want to, I want to thank my family. I want to thank my manager. I want to thank, this rapper who kind of got me here, and this agent who believed in me. But most importantly, I want to thank me for never for never taking a day off, for never quitting, for never listening to the haters. And he's just, and everyone's like screaming and yelling and clapping. And like, I think about that sometimes, and like, I don't know, like the CrossFit, like competing as a professional athlete is it's a selfish pursuit. And I think you kind of have to like be okay with that. And, it doesn't mean I'm not still doing good. I'm not still like trying to influence people and like, help other athletes when I can. And like, I mean, even I guess with the PFA, like I'm doing that, and that's a lot of work. That's pretty thankless most of the time. But yeah, as far as like listening to other people, you just really kind of learn, like even through the Open this year, like I didn't look at the leaderboard for the whole Open. It was awesome. Didn't look at it once. And then I finished quarters and I went and I looked at it and I went, oh smokes, I came 1,000th in the world. Like that's not, not an insult to anyone who came lower than me or anything, but like 1,000th place for someone who just came third in the world is not very good. Right? Like it's a pretty big drop off. And I gave my best effort on those workouts. Like I wasn't sandbagging it. I went as hard as I could on those days. Like training leading up to them was, maybe not ideal to maximize those scores, but I'm sure I was on some podcast, people talking about my scores or something, and I just chose not to listen to it. And if I had heard it, probably would have upset me a bit. But yeah, man, I think I think someone asked me the other day, like, oh, what advice would you give your younger self or something? And I think I said something like, just don't be afraid to be you. There's and I think back to when I was a teenager, and and I wouldn't really give myself advice because everything's fine. Like I turned out well and whatever. And it's not like I did anything too embarrassing as a teen. But
That's the
you
next
look
episode.
back,
We'll discuss that.
Yeah, oh man. Yeah. I mean, like, definitely not as bad as some, but there's still things you shake your head at for sure. But I'd go back and I'd just be like, just be you, Brent. Like the person that you want to be and the things you like to do, like that's okay. And like you can just be that. You can wear what you want to wear. You can, like if you feel like doing that thing and not doing that thing, just say no to that and yes to that. And what's kind of funny is, if you look at like professional athletes and like I follow a bit of the NBA. I mean, the athletes that you respect the most are the ones that don't seem to care. Like as a whole, like there's times, there's moments where, the lows and the highs might be a little higher and lower for those athletes because you're like, oh, they're not playing the game. They're not like schmoozing or whatever it is. But over a longer period of time, you can kind of see through that like authenticity with an athlete or a person in the public eye that they're like, man, they're just genuinely like they are who they are. And there's just this lack of like pandering. And they don't seem to let all the little things get to them from the media or the fans or whatever that is, or expectations. And the expectation thing with someone like me is it's not like a lot of those expectations are even verbalized or written down. They're all perceived in my own head. I think that's something that kind of helped me is I'm like, no, like, like today is, whatever, May, whatever, June, whatever, like no one's thinking about me right now. You know what I mean? Like there's not like this army of CrossFit fans out there right now thinking like, oh, what's Brent going to do at the games? Or, oh, I wonder if Brent's training hard right now. Or, I mean, unless they're on Instagram at this exact moment, they happen to see my thing like, oh, Brent, cool, check. And then they move on. There's not people like humming and hawing over my existence. But sometimes I feel that way. And you're like, don't be so self-absorbed to think that people really give a shit. Like, like if you win the games or you don't win the games, like it'll be this blip on someone's day or radar. Even for the most diehard CrossFit fan, they'll be like, oh, wow, Brent won the games. That guy seems like a nice guy. Or, oh, I don't really like that guy. I wish this guy would have won. And then they'll just move on. And I think sometimes there's this perception that I've had this perception that there's all this like, oh man, I'm dealing with so much expectation. There's so much weighing on this. Yeah. I'm like, there really isn't, like there really isn't. And, like, I mean, yeah, if I had a terrible year, 2 years in a row, it's like, would I maybe lose some sponsors? Would I make less money? Yes. Would I still be able to pay my house payments? Yes. And if everything went to absolute trash and I just started losing every single competition I went to, and then I quit the sport in 2 years and I was just like, well, I guess I'm done. Like no one would really care. It's not like there'd be people laughing outside my house or laughing on social media. they would just move on and they just start cheering for someone else. Like there's not really as much. I think most of the expectations are perceived inside our own heads. I think that was a huge thing for me in the last 2 years, is all of this social pressure and all of these expectations and all that stuff. A lot of it's perceived, because if it is in fact real, it's much more fleeting than you give it credit. So if there's some fan or a sports analyst or someone on Instagram that writes a comment, they're writing that comment and then they've forgotten they've written it. Like if they write on my post, like, oh, Brent, I hope you have a great year this year. Like they're writing that and they're genuine about it. And then they don't, if you ask them later that day, hey, did you comment on Brent's post? They'd be like, I don't know, did I? They wouldn't even remember. And it'd be the same if it was a negative comment. If they're on CrossFit Games, there's a photo of me celebrating, and CrossFit's like, oh, Brent Fikowski winning event 2. What do you think his chances are this year? Someone's going to comment like, not very good. I think his I never thought he was that good. I think he just got lucky. Like someone's going to write something like that. And if I read it, it'll probably upset me. But the reality is that person just wrote that, just kind of like vomited on their screen, typed that in, and then went to some other post and wrote something else mean, and went to some other post and wrote something funny, just to try to get clicks and try to get likes and try to get a reaction. Or maybe they really, even if they truly believe that, and maybe they passionately believe that they had some reason to really hate me. Oh, he didn't sign an autograph for me that one year and I've got it out for him. It's fleeting, right? It's not like they're walking around all day. I'm the one who has to live with me, right? Like I'm the one who has to wake up and look at me in the mirror. I'm the one that has to brush my teeth, right? Like I'm the one that's in this gym every day. Like, it's like I'm the one who's with me. And so like, I know what's going on and I'm the one who actually cares. I think that's probably the most important thing is, all those other like expectations, they're perceived. But like, I'm the one who truly cares, like 10 times more than my parents, and my parents care a lot, 10 times more than my coaches, and my coaches care a lot, 5 times more than my wife. And my wife cares a lot about how I do, but she cares not because she's married to a CrossFit Games athlete. She cares because she loves me. She cares because she wants me to be happy. And she knows that if the competition goes well or well enough, that I won't be unhappy, and that brings her happiness. It's not like there's nothing else there. There's not like a ulterior motive, like, oh, maybe my Instagram post will get more likes if Brent wins. She doesn't care about that. She's like, I want my husband to be happy, and I want him, or almost more so, like, I don't want him to be sad. I want it to go well enough that he's not sad because it hurts me when he's sad. Yeah. And that's kind of the same as how my parents feel. Like, I just hope he has fun, is what my mom would say.
Yeah, Claire and your parents are not devaluing you in their opinion. If you go third instead of fourth, or fourth instead of third, or whatever, like this, it's not a change in opinion.
Or if I don't go unbroken on my last set of chest bars, what a loser! What a pussy! He let it slip through his fingers. He let the pressure get to him in the last moment. Like, he had it in his fingers and he just let it slip. The pressure was too much for him. It's like, they don't think that kind of stuff. Because that's
not what Claire told me. Actually, she messaged me prior and said that.
Exactly.
You were one of the first people I know to take their use of Instagram very seriously and just like go, right, these are limits, these are not getting broken, and like this is possible. Like, firstly, what sparked that, and secondly, how do you adhere to it? Because there's always that temptation to go, I'm gonna Instagram stalk rivals and see what they're doing and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so I guess those rules are like, I don't look at my rivals very much on Instagram. It's funny, actually. The other day I did a little bit. I was, I think it was maybe a week and a half ago, once the semi-final rosters were finalized. So got an upcoming competition, and I just wanted to see like what these guys have been up to. Right, I'm going to be competing against them. I want to beat them. So I was poking around, and it got to me. Like, it definitely, there was a day and a half to 2 days where like my confidence dipped in myself. It was super noticeable. It was crazy, actually. Now, I'm glad we brought this up. So, I rarely look at any male individual athletes' Instagram. Like, basically since January, basically none. If I'm on Instagram, I'm looking at, doing stuff for my business. I'm posting my own stuff, comment on my posts and reply to people's comments. And, I might look up like some photos of like Lego or something, or NBA. And so just, prepping for semis, I'm like, oh, I should kind of know what these guys are up to and do a bit of research. And yeah, and my confidence right before that was like really high. I'd had like 5-6 days of great training, like strength stuff was great, endurance stuff was great. Like, all this stuff was clicking. And then I watched some of those videos. I was looking at some of their scores on the game sites, and like some of them went to Wadapalooza. So I was looking at their Wadapalooza scores, and my confidence dipped in like a noticeable way for like a day and a half, 2 days. And I found myself thinking about those athletes. I'm like, oh man, I don't know. Like, those guys are pretty good. Like, maybe I can't win this one, but like even top 5, and I'm kind of like, I'm like lowering my expectations and my belief in myself after looking at these other athletes' Instagrams, and their scores, oh man, he beat me in like 3 of the 5 workouts or 4 of the 5 workouts in quarters. Like, man, that was I didn't think he'd be good at that workout. I thought that was a bad workout for him, and he crushed it at the quarters of the open or something. He must be getting better. It was really funny, actually. And then I like caught myself. It took me a day and a half. I caught myself. I'm like, Brent, like, what are you doing? Like, this is exactly why you don't look at other people's Instagrams. And again, like I talked about earlier in the podcast, I'm like, you need to give yourself good advice. Like, what would you tell yourself? If you were your friend and you heard yourself thinking these things or whatever, what would you say? And you'd be like, you beat these guys before, Brent. You beat these guys before. And yeah, there's probably, 40 reasons why they're going to beat you, and maybe like 60 reasons why you're going to beat them. And like, what are the reasons you're going to look at? Like, it's up to you. Like you can choose to focus on and obviously depending on the athlete, like, for someone like, let's be honest, for someone like a Pat or Justin Medeiros, there's probably more, reasons or little like, check marks in the column of like, here are all the reasons why like Justin Medeiros is going to beat you this year, Brent. And here are the reasons you're going to beat him. And there's probably more in the column of he's going to beat me. Like, a statistician or an analyst might say that, right? And that's just the reality of it, because he's had a great couple of years. And so those are the facts you're going to point at. But, it's like, I think there's a bodybuilder once that said, I never had to know my competition to know that I had something they didn't. Right? I think it was Jay Cutler. I never had to meet my competition or see my competition to know that I had something they didn't have. And, I think about that and I just think, hey, like, there's all these reasons that they could beat me, and they might, but, there's also a lot of reasons why I can probably beat them. And like, which you get to choose which ones you're going to focus on. And so, yeah, as far as Instagram, and then, like anything, Instagram's it's a tool, right? It's an app, and how you use that app is up to you, right? And, if you can find what makes you happy on the app or what makes you unhappy on the app, or what helps you reach your goals, probably even a better, for this type of podcast, what helps you reach your goals or not reach your goals. And in the case of me, it's like, scrolling around and looking at my competitors, doesn't do me any good. And like, I don't know. I think some people might say, oh, you're just like, that's soft. You're creating a safe space. Right. And I'm like, yeah, like maybe you're right. Like, I'm like shielding myself from that, but I'm like, it's like the open leaderboard. It's like, I didn't look at it until the end of quarters. And like, there's no rule saying I have to look at it. Right. There's no like, it's like, I mean, at the games, I don't look at the leaderboard until like the last event or two. So like, why would I do it any differently in the open? And like, I've done well at the games. So like, there's no rule saying you have to look at it. And I'm not superstitious. Like, if I happen to look at it or I happen to see it at the games of the open, I wouldn't like freak out. Just like in, if I'm on Instagram and I happen to stumble across, Justin Medeiros or Chandler Smith or someone hitting a PR, I'm not going to freak out and everything's going to crumble. Like, you need to have that resiliency, but it doesn't mean you need to seek out. And you hear a lot of professional athletes, like NBA players, like they'll watch the basketball game like on TV and they'll turn off the audio. Right. So they'll watch, another game, like 2 other teams, just because they enjoy the game, or they're watching the film to learn about their competitors. And some of them just enjoy watching the game. They just love the game. But they're like, yeah, I can't listen to the announcers because it's just toxic. Because, before they know it, they're going to slip in a word about, whatever, Kevin Durant's watching and he's watching a different game. All of a sudden, the announcers are going to start talking about him. He's like, I don't need to hear this. Like, this isn't helping me. My job is to put the ball in the hoop. And how does it help me if I'm listening to other people talking about how I'm not succeeding at that? Like, that's not. And so it's the same. It's like, you get to control that. It's a tool. Don't feel like there's some obligation that you need to follow, or you need to keep up with, or you need to post this or not post that, or read your comments or not. I mean, there's a lot of CrossFit athletes, I'm quite sure of it, that don't read the comments on their own posts, right? Because I mean, hell, if I was a female, I wouldn't. Like the kind of comments that the female CrossFit athletes have on their posts, it's brutal. Like I wouldn't go in there. I wouldn't go in my own DMs. If I was a female CrossFit athlete, I'd pay someone else or ask someone else, hey, can you look through my DMs once every 2 weeks? Delete all the crap. And if there's anything like valuable in there or something kind, I'll like respond to them and say, hey, good luck at your next competition. Love that you're a fan or whatever, if it's a business opportunity. But like, I wouldn't be going through there. It's just like swimming through sludge, So
yeah, you choose the environment you put yourself into, like, and that can be a digital environment, or it can be your training environment, or it can be your family and your relationships and all that kind of stuff. Like you choose that, and that's one of the things that is most likely to alter who you are. It's like that classic thing, if you're the sum of the 5 people you associate with most, it's like that kind of thing. And like, if you're choosing to associate most with random people on the internet who happen to comment on your posts or whatever, like that's not the wisest investment of who you're spending your time with.
That's that. It's funny. I was actually thinking of that quote, and I just didn't. I mean, I spoke there nonstop for like 5 minutes. I wasn't able to squeeze it in. But I was thinking about that quote, and there's a book. I forget which book it is, but the guy quotes that. It might have been The Art of Learning, and he's like, you might not be able to, depending on your life situation, like you might not physically be able to interact with 5 like influential and great people on a daily basis, but like you can read books, like you can, read books by William Shakespeare, or, someone who's, I mean, you can listen to this podcast, right? Like, you can do that kind of stuff on a daily basis, and that's going to be influencing you. You can choose, like, I mean, hell yeah, podcast is probably a great example. It's like whenever if you're listening to music or you're listening to a podcast, it's like you get to choose what music you listen to. You get to choose the podcast you listen to. You can listen to a podcast like this, or the Tim Ferriss podcast, or the what's the one in the UK that I like?
High Performance.
The High Performance podcast. Like, love listening to that. It's always such a mood booster most of the time. Or you can listen to just like some fluff, right? Like some comedians, complaining, which, again, is funny. Like, I do that sometimes too, but you can't do that. You do that every single day. It's like, that you're hearing them more than you're hearing, other people. And like, that's one of the 5 voices, is those comedians, like just talking about nonsense. Which, it's like, you're making that choice. You have that option. You have more options now than like, 30 years ago. It's like, well, if you work at a certain place, like those are going to be the 5 people that them and your wife, like those are going to be the people you hear the most. Like you're some of the 5 people, and those are the 5 people because you work with them. But now it's like, people, you have a lot more options to get good voices in, and that'll help shape who you are, right?
Yeah. If you're listening to this podcast, you have a plethora of opportunities to surround yourself in people that you actually would never previously had the opportunity to spend time with. Like, it's the equivalent thing, just listening to people talk. One thing I want to touch on before we wrap up is the idea of like online qualifiers, and how that is a difficult thing to contend with. So yeah, I'd like to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah. In this sport of CrossFit, the idea of a lot of the sport, for a lot of the athletes in this sport, the online qualifier is like this necessary evil, and emphasis on evil. And, the word necessary is hopefully just temporary. But if you look at the open or quarterfinals, or, locally here, there's an event called the Can West Games. You have to do a qualifier to get to that. Wadapalooza as a qualifier. There's all these online qualifiers, and it is a cool feature of our sport, but they really suck. Like I've been, there've been events that I've failed to qualify for, from an online qualifier, and it leaves you feeling a lot more like helpless than when you go to an actual competition. And so in most other sports, like, if you're training for a triathlon, it's like you're going to go to a triathlon, right? Like, I mean, there's a triathlon in Kelowna. You just sign up for it. You just pay the $120 or whatever it is, and they just say, well, try not to die, and you have a chip timer and like, that's it, right? Like do the course. And so you're training for it, and then, you get your time and you get your, if you do well enough, you get a medal, and then you qualify for the next thing. Whereas CrossFit, like there's a lot of really good athletes that work really, really hard, and their year ends in either the open or the quarterfinals. And if, you're trying to make it to the next, you're trying to make it, let's say, to semifinals, you're trying to make it to Wadapalooza, and you're just outside that cut line, there's this feeling of helplessness where you look at the person a few reps ahead of you that qualified, and you're like, I feel like I'm better than them. Like, and you search through Instagram or YouTube trying to find videos of them. And, like I've been there and I'm like, oh, I know I'm better than that guy. Like, I beat him at these real competitions like multiple times, or, he must have cheated, or there was these other scores. And don't get me wrong, sometimes that's true, right? I'm not trying to insult the people that have not qualified and say, oh, you have no reason to complain, like just be more good. And that's the unfortunate reality with this sport, is there's so much chaos with the events being different and online qualifiers being frustrating, and the athletes changing. The reality is you need to be so good that no matter how many of those things are stacked against you, you still succeed, you still make it to the next step. It's the reality of the sports. There's a huge, you need to create a large fitness buffer for all the nonsense. It's not really fair and it's not ideal, but it is what it is. And so I've been in that situation where I look at people that have beat me in an online qualifier and I'm like, man, like this is super frustrating. There's got to be a reason for it. And sometimes there isn't a good reason. And the reason is they just did and you didn't. And it's tough, it's really, really tough, because it's not a satisfying way to end a season. At least if you go somewhere, you pack your bags, you get to compete on a floor, you get some cool photos and videos, you get a competition experience. And if you finish, even if you finish last or almost last, there's like a realness to it. There's a tangible, you can taste it. There's memories associated with it. It's an experience, right? And at the end of the day, like even me, I'm fortunate now that it's it's a job for me and it's made me money. But for the longest time, and it still is, it's about the experience of competing, right? Like going to semifinals has me excited, not because it gets me to the games, that's part of it, not just because it makes me some money, but because semifinals is fun, right? Like getting to compete at the Granite Games, to put on I'll have probably a new Reebok shirt I get to wear. And, there's that nerves and you're on the starting line. Like it's so much more real than the online competition. The online competition is a means to an end. It sucks when it's the end, right? It doesn't feel fair to the person that spent months training and prepping and trying to do all the little things right. And then their season ends. Online competitions are a means to an end. They're not the end, and it sucks when they are the end. And dealing with that as an athlete is brutal, right? It doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel, it feels like you're like halfway through a song and then the song just stops. And there's this feeling of like, well, what happens next? Like, well, song's done. Whereas at least with like, if your season ends at semis, it's like, well, you just don't get to experience the next song. Like this was the first song and second song. And then, there's like another song and you haven't unlocked that song yet. Yeah. And so like, as far as dealing with that as an athlete, man, it's tough. It's kind of like what I spoke about earlier, it still has to be worth it. And I think you, as an athlete, you should still, especially now that COVID restrictions are lightening up, you should seek out in-person competitions, even if they're not semifinals or the CrossFit Games. Even if they're not like high level, they're just anything, right? Even just organize one yourself, right? Like, find some people at your level and say, hey, let's get 5 people together. Let's do like 3 workouts on Saturday and set it up like a competition, like a real, like lanes and the whole, rules and workouts, and we'll each write a work or something, because like that's real and that's the sport. And that'll like give you a lot more satisfaction in your training and keep you wanting to have more. Yeah. Cause it's hard, man. Like it's obviously someone has to not qualify. There's always going to be someone, and it's a very frustrating part of the sport. And I think it adds a level of frustration and helplessness. And, I think I wouldn't be surprised if there are definitely a good chunk of athletes that have, took the sport pretty seriously, trained pretty hard, didn't make it to the next step. Let's say it's semis and regionals, maybe for a year or two, and then kind of quit. and I don't blame them, right? Because it's like in another sport, at least there'd be a lower division where they could still play volleyball. They could still, right? They could still play the sport and play the game of volleyball or triathlon just because they didn't make the Canadian championships. They could still compete in triathlons and still maybe climb their way up there eventually after, instead of 2 years, maybe it takes 4, or at least, still be a participant and a competitive participant in the sport, even if it's at a slightly lower competitive level. Yes. For those of you out there that are struggling with that, like, know that, like, remind yourself why you do it. And hopefully it's not just to make semis, right? It's not just to make regionals. Like, that shouldn't be the sole reason for your existence, the sole reason for your training. Because one, like, it is fun, don't get me wrong, but if you're expecting it to be like this amazing thing, it's probably not going to be as great as you think. It's still hard. It still sucks. Probably still going to get a crappy judge for an event. If you're struggling to get in, the reality is, you're probably not going to finish in the top 10. So you're not going to be in the top heat. You might not get a lot of good photos, right? Like, that's another thing. It's like, hey, if you go to Granite Games and you're ranked 25th, there's not going to be a lot of lenses. You're not going to maybe get a lot of awesome, action shots of you competing on the regional semifinal floor for your Instagram. Like, you might not get those unless you plan in advance, have someone there taking photos for you. So, it's like, kind of keep that in mind. Like, yes, it's a worthy goal, and it's a hell of a lot better than finishing your season online, but it's not the be all end all. Like, it's gone in a flash, right? In a blink of an eye, those competitions are over, and you're left with a couple distinct little memories. If you're lucky, a photo. If you're lucky, you're on the live stream for a bit. So, like, it's a catch-22. Like, it is worth it, and it is fun, and you should strive for that. And I wish more people got to end their season at a real competition and not online. But if you're struggling to make it to that step, don't give up, but don't continue in the hopes that it's going to be this, like, amazing experience. You probably have more fun buying a ticket for Coachella, to be honest, or or Lollapalooza instead of Wadapalooza. And then, if you do, and then try to compete, like, try to get out there, even if it maybe quote unquote takes away from your training, to maximize your quarterfinal or open prep, like, try to get to a competition or organize one yourself. Yeah.
Exactly, man. It loops back into that that piece we're talking about. Is the process worth it? Is the process worth it at the end of the day? Like, or is that you doing this for an outcome, or are you doing this for enjoyment of what you're doing right now? And is that meaningful enough in itself to make you think, hey, everything I did back then was worth it, regardless of whether I got to the games or got to semis or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you need to. It needs to be worth it in and of its own self. The pursuit, and don't get me wrong. Like, you should. It's still okay to have those, like, extrinsic, those external goals. Like, I want to win a gold medal and I want to qualify for this. It's like, those are still fine. And, like, I obviously, but, like, those don't really. I think when I talk about the process, and some people are like, well, don't you want to win? And I'm like, well, yeah, but that doesn't separate me from anyone else. Like, when I go to the Granite Games, you stuck a microphone in someone's mouth and you said, would you rather get first or second? What do you think? So clearly, or would you rather get second or 22nd? Or would you rather be here or be at home? Like, that doesn't separate anyone, right? Like, at the games, it's not about who wants it more. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's like, we all want to win the CrossFit Games. Like, we wouldn't, it's not even like people say, well, you wouldn't be here if you didn't want to win. It's like, no, like, it's just, you could ask someone in the crowd, like, would you rather win the CrossFit Games or come 8th? It's like, well, how bad do you want it though? It's like, what does that even mean? Like, obviously, like, like, what is that? Well, how bad? It's like, how much pain am I willing to endure during a workout? It's like, well, pain isn't always an indicator of getting the best score, right? Like, if I wanted to have the most painful 1 mile run, I would sprint the first 100 meters. And then, like, Pat and I have talked about this. He's like, interesting. Like, we're talking about pain, and there's this glorification of pain in CrossFit. He's like, it's kind of funny. He's like, most of the time I strategize a workout to experience as little pain as possible. Yeah. Exactly. and he was being sarcastic, but it's kind of true. It's like, the first 80% of the workout shouldn't be that painful, and the last 20% hurts. It's like, You know, like the desire to win isn't the separator. It's like who's better, who executes, and you know, obviously the year of training makes you better, but it's not necessarily like training more or like training through more pain. It's just like you just got to train the right amount to get better. It's not like So anyway, I don't know. I don't really remember where that came from, but yeah, you know, as far as external goals and internal goals, like the training has to be worth it on its own, or else, you know, you're not going to stick with it long enough to get anything out of it anyway.
Nice. I think that's a great place to wrap up. Thank you again for joining me, dude. I really appreciate your time. Where can people, obviously they can follow you on Instagram, which is at Fikowski. Where else should they go to check out your work, and where can they check out the Professor Project, things like that?
So, you know, I have two companies, the Professor Project and Train Your Weakness. So the Professor Project is programming, and then there's a bunch of videos on mindset and strategy and competition preparation, and some technical videos on like how to cycle a barbell, how to cycle your toes to bar, that sort of thing. And a community where I'm communicating and like giving advice to people and talking about workouts and stuff. So the professorproject.com, and then Train Your Weakness is, they're just like shorter kind of like tack on or add on programs. So kind of for the person that's training at a CrossFit gym, doing the daily workout, or training, you know, maybe at a global gym, but they want to get a skill. So it's like, maybe you've been doing CrossFit for a couple of years and you can't do bar muscle up yet, or your double unders still suck, or you can't handstand walk for shit. Go to trainyourweakness.com, and you know, the programs they're only like $20 each, and they're 6 weeks, 3 sessions a week. It sounds like an infomercial for just 6 weeks and 3 sessions a week for 30 minutes. But that's kind of the idea, right? It's like if you have like the muscular, like if you have the build and stuff to do a bar muscle up, but you can't do it, you just need to practice it. You just need some drills, you need something to follow. So the bar muscle up session, it's like, you know, 30 minutes 3 times a week for a couple of weeks, and we've had like a lot of people get their first bar muscle up or their first ring muscle up, or, you know, improve their double unders, and they've been doing CrossFit for years. So yeah, check those out, trainyourweakness.com, professorproject.com. And yeah, just check me out on Instagram. I got a website with, you know, a little story about me and some photos and stuff. And yeah.
Perfect. That's it. Lovely stuff. Thank you, man.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Limitless Athlete podcast. If you enjoyed the show, head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe. Whilst you're there, if you can, leave a nice comment, 5-star review, that kind of thing. And also don't forget to follow us on Instagram for not only more podcast updates and who's coming up on the show, and to have your say in who we can interview, but also get some mindset coaching whilst you're at it too. A little heads up, in a few weeks time, just over a month time, we're going to be releasing spaces to the mindset training camp. We don't run these that often anymore, but they are very good when we do, and we love running them. So check that out. Keep an ear to the floor, if that's the right phrase, and I'll speak to you next week.